The Cincinnati Bengals are in the Super Bowl against the Los Angeles Rams this weekend. We'll be in LA this Saturday. Myself, Michael, Colin, Brian, and Mark popping up later on. Colin, welcome in. Before we start, the Irish NFL show will be presented by Matchbook Betting Exchange. £20, €20 welcome offer. Money back as cash. First bet loses this weekend on the Super Bowl. More on that later on. T's and C's below. And thank you to Matchbook for their continued support. We're also presented by Trust Gaming. We want to bring in our first guest ahead of a big weekend in the NFL, the Super Bowl in SoFi Stadium. Delighted to welcome back Mo Egger from ESPN Cincinnati, among other outlets as well. Mo, we said we'd bring you back on. You went to Kansas City. You beat the Chiefs. Didn't just beat the Chiefs, though. You came back from arguably, 20, whatever, 3. Oh my God. Congratulations for a start and welcome back.
It's good to be here with you guys. It's a pretty surreal time here in Cincinnati, but a lot of fun.
Mo, I suppose, look, the victory against the Chiefs, you're away at Arrowhead. We all know, we talked about it, the noise. Down 21-3, backs against the wall. Mahomes is having a game for the ages, and everything he touches, he's like King Midas, right? Everything he touches turns to gold. And all of a sudden, everything changes. When needed, the Bengals offense steps up, the Bengals defense steps up, and then that second half performance where they put the squeeze on Mahomes, unlike really anything we've seen, because it was different. Last year in the Super Bowl, it was his O-line and he was kind of running for his life. This wasn't that. This was an absolute domination. I think what was it, 2.4 yards he was held to per play in the second half. Can you talk us through, I suppose, as a fan of the Bengals, what was that like, watching the team come back and watching that second half performance in particular?
It was I was gonna say, you can't believe it, but honestly, this team has defied expectations so many different times. They played the Chiefs at Paul Brown Stadium 28 days prior. They were down 14 points on 3 different occasions. I'm not going to tell you that at 21-3, I thought the Bengals were going to win. I did feel like they would respond with something. I didn't think this was going to end 42-3. I didn't think this was going to end with just utter embarrassment. I'd be lying if I told you I thought it was going to end with a Bengals victory, but you had a sense that the way this team had played all season, the way they had played against Kansas City the first time, that they were going to respond with something. And so, to me, you start with Samaje Perine. Of all the offensive weapons, Samaje Perine's the guy that sort of changes things offensively with that 41-yard touchdown pass. And then what Kansas City does at the end of the first half, to me, it just felt like it opened the door. They got greedy. I put it more on Patrick Mahomes than I do Andy Reid. But, dude, get 3 points there. No matter what you do, you get 3 points, you get the ball to start the second half. But it was really when they got the stop to start the second half that you started to think, you know what, this could happen. Number one, they were buying Joe Burrow some time. Number two, you got the sense that they had made the kind of adjustment you need to on defense. They dared the Kansas City Chiefs to run it. They refused. I'm still not sure why the Chiefs abandoned their running game. They made things uncomfortable enough for Patrick Mahomes where there weren't that many windows with which he could throw. They got the B.J. Hill interception. That felt enormous. It's one of the biggest plays in recent franchise history. But, all of that unfolds. And then there you are, up 3 in the waning moments, and Kansas City's driving. And there was a sense of maybe not inevitability, but you kind of felt like, all right, best case, this is going to go to overtime. And then if it does, you better not lose the toss. They played great defense near the goal line. Did a great job of covering everybody. I thought the Chiefs were a little bit too preoccupied with the clock and not so much the scoreboard. They go to OT. Kansas City's offense in the second half looked so sort of, and here's a term you don't hear all that often, janky, that I felt like it's not inconceivable that they get a stop in overtime. It didn't have that sense of inevitability that it did against Buffalo, where you thought whoever wins the toss wins the game. I like the way the Bengals had defended. You could tell they were doing a really good job in coverage and not creating many small windows for Mahomes to throw in. They ultimately got the pick from Von Bell. And when the Bengals got the football back, especially with the kicker they have, you kind of had a sense, as long as they don't screw this up, this team's going to the Super Bowl. I made all that sound really easy and really unemotional, but living it in real time was torturous. I wanted to vomit at the end of regulation. I couldn't. People were having these debates about, what do you let the Chiefs score at the end of regulation? I couldn't do that. I couldn't process that mentally. All I could think of was, if they blow this, am I going to throw up? And if they win, am I going to throw up? It was an emotional roller coaster, and I've gone back and watched it, and it's so I've watched it from a more sort of logical, maybe slightly analytical standpoint, but in real time, it was something that I'll never forget experiencing, as they mounted their comeback, staved off the Chiefs at the end, got the ball in overtime, drove down to field goal range, and had Evan McPherson make maybe the biggest kick in the history of the Cincinnati Bengals.
And it was one thing more, I think I messaged you on Monday or Tuesday after the game saying, and I really mean it, I don't think there's a deserving fan base more than the Bengals. Like, they've waited so long for this moment, and just seeing the reaction from Bengal fans in UK and Ireland. I spoke to a few fans in Ireland this week, and they're near tears even thinking about this weekend, and it's just going to be an incredible weekend. Now, the one thing that's really entertained me over the last few days, I'm not sure if Colin's seen this, Jim Irsay from the Colts has put a tweet up saying he's sending 2 pairs of Bengals fans to the Super Bowl. Now, some of your tags in this have been incredible. I'm wondering, have you won? Are you heading over to SoFi? What's the crack there? What's going on there?
So he sent the tweet out about sending the Bengals to or sending Bengals fans to the Super Bowl, and I was just messing with Jim. I was just messing around and sort of being silly. And honestly, I started sharing photos of myself in Bengals because he was looking for hardcore Bengals fans, and I was sort of screwing with my buddies who were in some of the photos that I was in. I was sort of making a commentary about how whenever you have a team that kind of comes from nowhere, there are people who, as we say here, gatekeep fandom and love to tell you, well, I was a fan back when they stunk and you weren't. And so I always laugh at that, because I don't know that there's a right or wrong way to be a sports fan. So I was sort of mocking the idea that, well, I was this hardcore fan when none of you people were. And I was really just screwing around. I was also trying to bring attention to, here's a guy, if you want to go to the Super Bowl, follow Jim Irsay and retweet him here. He's giving away a couple of tickets, and lo and behold, he did. I wasn't doing it thinking I was going to win Super Bowl tickets from Jim Irsay, and I don't think I deserve them more than some of the people who also entered his contest, and obviously the people who won. I was really just trying to have a little fun on Twitter, which is what I often try to do. The problem is sometimes when you're having fun on Twitter, you can find a miserable person who doesn't want to have any fun at all. And I certainly encountered those people as well.
Yeah, it's always the danger with Twitter. But maybe before we go into the game itself, can you talk to us a little bit about Duke Tobin and the job he's done? With that surname, he's got to have some Irish roots, right?
I think so. I don't know if anybody's asked him. Duke Tobin deserves a lot of credit for what he's done, and he flies under the radar because he doesn't own the title of general manager. And I think so because of that, what he does sort of escapes the notice of people who don't take a deep dive into the job that he's done and the way this team operates. And, you start with Zach Taylor. One of the more striking images for me in recent Bengals history was when they hired Zach Taylor. There is a shot at the podium of Mike Brown, the owner, Zach Taylor, the coach, and Duke Tobin. And the message was clear. This is Duke Tobin's decision. And Mike Brown said as much. So you start there. It appears he's hired the right coach. And then, you give ownership credit for arming Duke Tobin with the ability to build the team in a modern way using free agency. But most of the free agency decisions they've made have worked. And they had to overpay some guys. They had to overpay good players to want to come here. That's just what you have to do at some point. The Bengals typically, frankly, don't do that, but they did it. They overpaid DJ Reader. That move has worked. And then if you go back to just the way they've sort of assembled the pieces on defense, they've made some decisions that have really worked out. I said before the season that the Bengals led the league in guys that when you watch this team, you go, oh, that guy's with the Bengals now? Or wait a minute, I remember him. He's still in the NFL. They've gotten a lot of mileage out of some of those guys. Think of Eli Apple. I think maybe to a degree Von Bell. The decision to sign Trey Hendrickson and bypass the opportunity to bring back Carl Lawson. Trey Hendrickson is going to go down, I think, as one of the best free agent acquisitions in the history of this franchise. Riley Reef has gotten hurt and hasn't played in the postseason, but the decision to make him a target in free agency on the offensive line, when all anybody could talk about for months and months and months and months was go get Joe Thuney. Not that Joe Thuney would have been bad, but they found an option that could help make them a little bit better on the offensive line. And then, you look at the draft and, clearly it was a no-brainer to take Joe Burrow, but their decision-making when it came to Jamar Chase versus Penei Sewell, it wasn't so much about one player versus the other. It was about a philosophy. And their philosophy was we can get to a different place offensively by making slight improvements on the offensive line, having an elite core of wideouts, having dudes who are always going to get open. We'll take that combined with our quarterback gaining more experience and being really smart. That's going to keep him out of harm's way. They know they have to upgrade the offensive line, but what they've done is made just enough of an improvement in that area that combined with being great on the outside with Jamar Chase has taken this offense to an entirely different level. But it's not just Burrow and Chase. Logan Wilson, Jesse Bates, Evan McPherson, T. Higgins, they've done a really good job in recent years. You include Sam Hubbard in the conversation, Joe Mixon in the conversation, who was frankly a controversial pick that I wasn't nuts about the Bengals taking him. But he has justified their faith in him and their trust in him. And some of those guys go back to the previous coaching regime. But whether it be some of the decisions made in free agency, the decisions made in the draft, his role in hiring Zach Taylor, I think you have to give Duke Tobin a lot of credit for the job he's done, because when they drafted Joe Burrow, you can say, well, all you had to do was get a quarterback and everything else was going to fall into place. And certainly the most important piece did fall in place. But when they drafted Joe Burrow, remember the national conversation was, if Joe goes to Cincinnati, the organization's going to fail him. And while I don't think the Bengals have built a great roster, they certainly haven't failed him, and they've built him a roster good enough to go with them to the Super Bowl.
Last one from me, Mo. I'm going to ask the obvious question. You look at that Rams defense. Does that scare you as a Bengals fan and Bengals analyst as well? Or how does Burrow and that Bengals offense get past that defense? Because that defense is scary, even for me watching it.
I think Aaron Donald's the best player in the NFL, and not best defensive player, not best defensive lineman. I think he's the best player in the NFL. He can single-handedly destroy everything you're trying to do in the game. And so that to me is the question of this game a week from Sunday. How do you start with him? What do you do? How do you keep him from destroying you? We saw what the Tennessee Titans did against Cincinnati on the interior of that defensive line. There are very few players in the league who you could just say block Aaron Donald. So what can they come up with schematically to keep Aaron Donald from wreaking havoc? And I put a lot of that on Joe Burrow as well, because he's going to get hit and he's going to get sacked because of breakdown in pass protection, because Von Miller can come after you, because that great Rams front led by Aaron Donald, they're going to get pressures. Okay, what about the times when the pressure's there, but Joe's got time to get rid of it? Does he hold on to it too long, which we saw against Tennessee? So that brings up questions about coverage. You start with Jalen Ramsey. Let's assume Jalen Ramsey and Jamar Chase spend most of the afternoon with each other. Does Jalen Ramsey blanket Jamar Chase? And if the answer is yes, does T. Higgins have the kind of game that he had against Kansas City? And does Joe get him the ball? That to me is what this game comes down to. And do the Rams force turnovers? The Bengals, I think we talked about this last week, they're 12-1 now this season when they don't lose the turnover battle. It's very, very simple. When they don't turn it over, or when they turn you over more than you turn them over, the Bengals win. Their last 6 games that have meant anything, that's been their MO. Sometimes they've been explosive, sometimes not so much. But if they don't turn it over, they win. So does the pressure created by LA's front turn into turnovers? Because against Tennessee, the answer was no. It might have taken him out of field goal range, might have put him in 3rd and longs, things like that. But they didn't force Joe into making the kind of play that could have sent that game going the other way. So that to me is really, really worth paying attention to. And then, from a Cincinnati perspective on defense, it's remarkable. I don't think this has ever happened in the NFL where a team wins 3 consecutive postseason games in which their last play on defense is a pick, is a turnover. They have been very opportunistic. They have made the right plays at the right times. Does that continue? And then what's the plan for Cooper Kupp? But yeah, getting back to your question, that Rams defense is insane, and it starts Zach Taylor talked about this when they played in London 2 years ago. He said, they sit down and they're watching film. And Zach had obviously been in Los Angeles working with the offense the year before, and they're watching film of Aaron Donald. And he and Brian Callahan, the offensive coordinator, just looked at each other while they're watching tape, and they just laugh because the dude is so good. So what can they come up with 2 weeks to prepare for a guy that I think is the best player in the NFL? That is going to be fascinating to get the answer to.
Absolutely. And obviously, if you come up with a plan to stop Donald, then you got to figure out a way to take care of Von Miller on the other side. But Mo, finally, before we let you go, I suppose interested in like your game pick, but also we spoke about him a lot the last time, and Joe Burrow. When the stakes are the highest, that he seems to respond best to pressure. I mean, there are a lot of great QBs, a lot of great head coaches who pressure does funny things to people. And I say that as a Broncos fan. Peyton Manning, pressure did funny things to Peyton. But Burrow, when it comes to championship games, when it comes to the playoffs, it doesn't matter whether he's getting hit 9 times. It doesn't seem to matter when his back is against the wall and he's an Arrowhead. He seems to be able to, meet that pressure, meet that expectation, and go about his business. On the biggest stage, is he going to continue to be able to do that? And can you see a way that the Bengals can beat the Rams?
If it's a big game, I'm not betting against Joe Burrow. He's proven, at least thus far, in his college and professional football career, when the stakes are at their highest, he's at his best. And there's just some athletes you say that about. I mean, that's and it's not that he's bad when the stakes are not so high. He's been better than advertised here in Cincinnati, but it's uncanny. The way in which he has played in, huge games at LSU with the SEC title up for grabs and the college football playoff. And then, obviously here in Cincinnati in the postseason, I think it's interesting. You could talk about the way he's played in the playoffs and you could say, well, you know what? He still has his best ball in front of him because he hasn't played great. He's been really, really good. But, if you would have said to most of us, the Bengals are going to go to the Super Bowl, we would have said it's because Joe Burrow just torches everybody. Well, that they've kicked a bunch of field goals and they've played well on defense and they haven't turned it over, and Burrow's made some pretty big throws. So a week from Sunday, do you finally get that breakthrough game, or does him not being at his absolute best catch up to this team? I think that's a fair question. But if it's a big game and the game is close and Joe Burrow has a chance to do something about it in the waning moments, I'm not betting against him until there's reason for me to bet against him. This Rams team is really, really good. And their defense, we've talked about some of the particulars, but, we said it about the Kansas City game. Get me to the fourth quarter, have me within a score, get the ball in Joe Burrow's hands, going to feel like I got a shot. That happened, and the Bengals won the game, and Joe came through. If this game a week from Sunday can sort of unfold the same way, and you're telling me in the fourth quarter this game is going to be in doubt and Joe can have something to do about it, I'm going to feel pretty good as a Bengals fan that they're going to win the game.
At Mo Egger on Twitter, Mo, ESPN Cincinnati, all right, listen, Mo, thank you so much for coming on. Look, if the Bengals win, we'll share a few jars, a few pints in LA at the weekend, and we'll see what happens. But
let's make that happen.
Thanks so much for coming on the last couple of weeks, Mo, and thank you for your support.
Anytime, no problem, guys. Thanks.
Great to talk some Bengals with Mo Egger. We got Brian on the broadcast now, and delighted to welcome our next guest, a great friend of the show. Great to have Sam Monson from Pro Football Focus back on the Irish NFL show again. Sam, a warm welcome in at a very busy time of the year.
Yeah, it's all go now. The season finishes, but that just starts the madness, right? Because now it's draft season, it's free agency. Like if anything, the first couple of months of the off season in the NFL is busier than the regular season, or certainly the playoffs.
Absolutely, and Sam, the Super Bowl we all seen coming. The Rams against the Bengals. I mean, I think we all. It's a bit mad, isn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, the Bengals in particular, like the Rams, I think always had the capability of getting there. Like the question was, were they going to? And that was with most of the field in the NFC. You know, Dallas had the ability to go on a run. The Rams did. Tampa Bay, obviously. Most of the NFC, I think, was like that it was a case of one of these teams was going to have to get hot at the right time, go on that run. The Rams ended up being that team. At the AFC, I think we expected it to be chaotic because of the way the AFC had been all the way through the regular season. But Cincinnati being the team to emerge from that and to go on that run and beat these teams despite, Joe Burrow being under pressure, and ultimately to then travel and knock off Kansas City, that's crazy. Like that's not supposed to have happened.
Sam, the first time you joined us was around this time last year in the lead up to the Super Bowl, and the Stafford trade had just happened, and we discussed that at the time. A year on, the Rams are in the Super Bowl, but I suppose what are your thoughts on the Stafford trade now?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like they're a game away from being completely vindicated, right? Like everything they've done has been in pursuit of a Super Bowl and getting one step further than when they made it the last time and they didn't get the ring. And the question was always, how big of an upgrade is Matthew Stafford? And is it as big of an upgrade as a lot of people thought it was? And, there are people out there that think that Matthew Stafford is like a top 5, top 3 quarterback in the NFL. And there's never really been a ton of evidence to suggest that that's true. He's always been capable of incredible plays and big throws and all those kinds of things. But ultimately, it always kind of shakes out to the same area of being below that point. And he makes some mistakes and puts the ball in harm's way and all those kinds of things. And he's still doing that. And what we're seeing is that the rest of the team is good enough that they can live with that. And the positive that Stafford brings, the ability to hit those big throws at the end of the game to Cooper Kupp, to fix a lot of the bad that's happened before, or to just make big plays that aren't necessarily on the table to a guy like Jared Goff. Like the positive that he brings is enough to take this team from being a playoff contender to being into the Super Bowl again, and they'll be favorites for this game and potentially then win it. So it was a big price to pay, and because of that, it's always going to be a risky type of trade. But they've been kind of proved right. Like the difference between Stafford and Jared Goff, even if it isn't a huge one, even if it isn't a yawning chasm people think it is, it has been enough to take them to the Super Bowl and be one game away from making the whole thing worthwhile.
Sam, with the exception of the Bears, the coaching positions that have been filled so far are predominantly by offensive coordinators. The Giants, the Raiders, soon to be the Vikings with Kevin O'Connell, and the Broncos. They've all gone with an offensive coordinator. Is that large part due to the aggressive nature of the league now? Offense dominates it more so, or is it a case that teams who are moving on from defensive-minded head coaches have got a different route this time around?
I think it's probably a bit of both. There's always a tendency of teams to go in the opposite direction of whatever they just came out of. If you get rid of one thing, you go and find almost the antithesis of that guy and start again and swing back in that direction. But I think there's also something to the idea that the league is offense is everything now. Like everybody has a high-powered offense. If you want to be successful, you need to be good on that side of the ball. And teams are chasing that particular side of coaches. And then the other element is, if you get a defensive head coach and you go and find a coordinator that can execute your offense, if that guy's good, you're going to have to do the whole thing over again in a year or two, right? When he gets a head coaching job. So I think there is a tendency for teams now to hire offensive minded head coaches, if for no other reason than if that guy's good, you can keep him there for a period of time. And now you only have to worry about replacing his coordinator or his quarterback coach. And these are guys that, in theory are doing less anyway if the offensive mind is the guy running the show. So, you think Sean McVay with the Rams, the Rams coaching staff has now been this conveyor belt of guys going off and getting head coaching jobs off the back of working with Sean McVay. But McVay is the guy that, structures the whole offense and has the whole thing functioning year on year. So it's not that big of a problem that they've lost, coaches every single season. Whereas if you were a defensive guy and that same thing was happening, that would be, I think, a much bigger disruption to the offense.
Obviously with Pro Football Focus and Pro Football Focus putting a lot this week into the Senior Bowl. We've been very fortunate to have Jim Nagy in the show this week or last week as well. How have you found the Senior Bowl so far? It's almost had weather like Ireland. Has any player maybe stood out to the guys at PFF this week?
I mean, I think Malik Willis the Senior Bowl is always going to be a really big week for him, the quarterback out of Liberty. And so far, it sounds like he's kind of knocking it out of the park and having a really big Senior Bowl week. I think the fact that there has been the weather and guys like Kenny Pickett with his reportedly very small hands who hasn't had them measured yet, like that guy's going to struggle in the rain. And most quarterbacks actually struggle a little bit in the rain. So Malik Willis with his big arm and, the ability to throw the ball and to get on the move, the weather has probably made him look better relative to these other guys than he would have otherwise. But him coming out of that week, I think, with a strong showing and impressing coaches in particular with what he knows and his knowledge and how much they think he can do at the next level would be huge for him, because his highlight reel is insane. It's the best of any of these quarterbacks in, a league that's just got through watching that Josh Allen versus Patrick Mahomes game and looks at these Mahomes, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, these sort of freakishly tooled quarterbacks that are incredible when they're playing at their best. I think that makes a guy like Malik Willis really enticing. And there are teams that are going to talk themselves into, his upside and what he can do, what he can become if he puts it all together. I think he's had a really impressive week so far.
Sam, one of the teams who've had kind of a baffling 12 months is the Carolina Panthers. And, so just strange decisions, I think, across the board. And the Sam Darnold trade just hasn't worked out. Where do the Panthers go from here?
I think the Panthers are actually in quite a lot of trouble in terms of figuring out where they need to go, because they still don't have a quarterback. That's the most important thing. Late in the season, obviously they fired Joe Brady, who was the offensive coordinator, a guy whose star had been on the rise, and that felt a lot like a kind of scapegoat type of move. But there's no solution to this on the horizon. And we have an index that we put up on pff.com, a guy called Aryan created it, that's sort of evaluating the offseason, the capacity of teams in the offseason to get better, right? So salary cap space and draft capital, and how much, not just how much salary cap room you have, but how much ability you have to create it with restructures and those kinds of things. And the Panthers are amongst the worst teams in the NFL in terms of having any sort of wiggle room in the offseason. They don't have a ton of draft capital. They don't have a ton of cap space or easily creatable cap space. And they still don't have a quarterback. They're on the hook for Sam Darnold's fifth-year option, whether he plays or not. They're not going to be having, Cam Newton is unlikely to be the starter. They don't have a starting quarterback going forward, and no obvious path to get one unless they want to make the plunge at the top of the draft and grab one of those guys. And even if they did, they still have no offensive line to protect them. So all of a sudden, I think the Panthers are under an absolute ton of pressure without an awful lot of margin for error to get better in one offseason.
Sam, you touched on the point that I suppose the draft season won't be long upon us. And last year was probably one of the craziest drafts in the years, with the 49ers moving up so early in the process, and then the Dolphins mixing it up with the Eagles. The Eagles sit there this year with 3 first-round picks, and people were pleasantly surprised how well Jalen Hurts played in the end. But a lot of people are kind of touch and go whether he really is the answer, because they didn't really beat any teams of note with a proper winning record. Were you surprised how quickly they came out at the end of the season and kind of committed to him for another year? Do you think they're showing the card a little bit too early, depending on what happens in this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is it doesn't necessarily mean they're telling the truth. You know what I mean? Like the Chicago Bears were, perfectly happy to declare Andy Dalton as the starter and then immediately go and get Justin Fields rolls in. And this has happened before as well. Remember, Mike Glennon was the answer in Chicago, and immediately they draft his successor as well. So there's no harm in them saying that Jalen Hurts is going to be the guy going forward right now, but they have 3 first-round draft picks, and anything is still on the table, I think, for Philadelphia, including being in the sweepstakes for a veteran quarterback if a Russell Wilson starts to become available or an Aaron Rodgers is suddenly out there. Like, Philadelphia has some offseason flexibility with all those first-round picks to get themselves into some of these conversations. And if they don't, if they decide that none of those are worth it, the quarterbacks in the draft aren't worth the investment, and the cost is too great to be in the Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers types of sweepstakes, then I think they're happy enough to move on with Jalen Hurts and deploy those 3 first-round picks on building around him, maybe getting another first-round wide receiver to pair with Devontae Smith, and retooling some of that defense where the kind of quality that they had in the past has started to be chipped away at again. So I don't see there's no downside to me to kind of put it out there that, he's been really good, he'll be our guy going forward next year. But equally, I don't know that you necessarily want to take them at face value when they say that.
And encourage any viewers to go on to pff.com and check out Sam's latest mock draft ahead of the offseason. I can't believe the draft's only a few months away now, Sam, but you've done a really interesting one there at 20, I think, for the Pittsburgh Steelers with a quarterback from Ole Miss going there. That would be a really intriguing move if the Steelers went for a quarterback in the draft, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I think they might have to. They can't go into next season with Mason Rudolph as their starter. I think we just haven't seen anything like enough from him to be confident of that. They, I'm sure, will be interested in any veteran quarterback that's available in the market, but there aren't too many that it would make you tremendously excited. I mean, this is a team that needs a new direction and needs a new hope at that position, which probably leads you to the draft. And the Steelers are also a team that tend to sort of treat the draft very much as, here's what we need, here's what we get, right? We have a glaring need at this position. We draft them in the first round, job done. So all of a sudden, the Steelers have a needed quarterback for the first time since Roethlisberger was drafted back in 2004. And it just seems pretty logical, particularly in this draft where the quarterbacks are going to get pushed down a little bit, I think, because it's not a great year for them, that they'll decide which one of these guys is available, where they pick in the first round, and grab him, whether it's a Matt Corral, maybe whether it's a Kenny Pickett. Like, one of these quarterbacks is going to be available, if not a few of them, where they pick. And I think it's very likely that they end up grabbing one.
I suppose that for the 49ers, obviously disappointment with how the season ended, but in terms of the next steps, Trey Lance coming in, I mean, going off Jimmy's goodbye press conference early the other night, what are your thoughts, I suppose, on what we saw Lance very limited this year? Debo was a lot of fun, but where, in terms of Lance, and where with Jimmy G, do you see potential landing spots for him, Sam?
It's very difficult to know where Jimmy G would actually make sense, because it's very difficult to divorce him from the offense in San Francisco that is like a cheat code. Kyle Shanahan's system is incredible. It gets ridiculous production out of players like Nick Mullins and CJ Beathard. There's a difference between those guys and Jimmy G. And even though some of the numbers are similar, there are other numbers that aren't, including winning, right? So the difference between those guys who are average backups at best and Jimmy Garoppolo is significant. And it's a difference between winning and losing a lot of games there. But like, Garoppolo is not offering an awful lot on top of what's being schemed up within that offense. He had, I think, 11 big time throws on the entire season, an incredibly low number. He does put the ball in harm's way a lot. So he's not just the kind of Alex Smith style of game managing quarterback that, simply doesn't make mistakes, but isn't bringing much to the table either. He does make a lot of mistakes, and he doesn't bring a lot of huge plays to offset it. What you rely on is his kind of efficiency executing the offense. But if you take that out of San Francisco and you transplant him somewhere else, the offense isn't going to be that efficient. And if you have a quarterback that just does what the offense schemes up and nothing more, that isn't good enough for most teams in the NFL. It wasn't even good enough for the Rams. That's why they got rid of Jared Goff and went looking for a Matthew Stafford. So, and all of that is completely independent from the fact that like his injury history is horrific. And that on its own, I think would have been enough for the 49ers to go looking for a replacement. So you add all those things together, and I don't see a strong market for Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't think his kind of selling points are big enough for a team to trade anything significant for, or to even bring him in on any kind of decent contract. I think at best he's going to have to hope that he can compete somewhere where they don't have an established quarterback and maybe serve as a bridge quarterback to a developmental rookie. Like if the team drafts Malik Willis and doesn't think he's ready to start year one, maybe Jimmy Garoppolo gets a year or, to prove that he can be a guy while they get that guy ready.
Sam, you touched on Jared Goff there, and obviously he was a part of that deal, which we discussed earlier in terms of Matthew Stafford. And I've had a few Lions fans, obviously, who've spoke to me and said that they obviously weren't impressed too much by Goff last season. But that's kind of a precarious one as well, because they've taken so much on with that contract. They do have a high pick, but as you said, whether the quarterback quality is there in this draft, they're kind of stuck with him to a large part in a way. And do they consider rebuilding the offensive line and complement Penny Sewell and try hope they can run it back for him for another year?
Yeah, they are kind of stuck with him, but I don't think that's not a surprise. It was kind of part and parcel of the trade, where that trade was essentially a salary cap dump by the Rams. It was a lot like the Brock Osweiler deal to Cleveland, years ago, where the trade was so big because Detroit was willing to take on Jared Goff's contract, and that comes with it a certain sort of degree of being stuck with him, right? And the good thing about Detroit is that this whole plan has clearly been a multi-year process. So last year, almost everything was invested in the trenches, on the defensive line, on the offensive line. And I think in part because those positions typically take a couple of years to play at their best, right? And we're already seeing guys like, Jonah Jackson up front play better in year two and start to take those developmental steps. Penei Sewell played well year one, should be better next year. If that offensive line and the defensive line keeps getting better this year, I think the resources will be a lot more on wide receivers, right? They almost didn't do anything there last season. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think, started playing well last year and sort of showed that he can be part of that receiving core. He's obviously not going to be a number one, but he can be a useful part of a new receiving group there. But they need to go and find that number one and number two. And probably keep throwing resources at the secondary as well, because their cornerbacks that they've drafted or brought in recent years have not necessarily set the world on fire. If a quarterback is there, like if a quarterback presents himself with their second pick in particular, maybe they do decide that there's a guy they love and there's great value. But I don't think they need to rush that. I think the Lions could roll with Goff for another year, knowing that he's not going to be the answer going forward, but just because they can eat another year in this rebuild, right? And deploy the resources on the at receiver, at cornerback, and all of a sudden you actually have most of a pretty good team in place, so that next offseason is the time where you move on from Jared Goff, and that's where you find the real quarterback of the future. So it's a really interesting kind of project that the Lions have going here. And I think that the Jared Goff part of it is not necessarily like a giant millstone around their neck. I think it's actually kind of a potential bit of flexibility that they have.
Sam, really appreciate your time today, and obviously over the last, I think, 3 or 4 times over this season. Just finally, this Sunday night, Rams-Bengals, who have you got? Who's going to win?
Man, I think the Rams, they're going to be the favorites. They should be the favorites. They make sense. I think they match up in a good way, like Aaron Donald against that weak link on the Bengals offensive line. But like Joe Burrow has been playing out of his mind in this year generally, but in the playoffs as well. He's been under pressure every single game, and it hasn't mattered yet. Like if he has one of those games again where no volume of pressure makes any difference, he's just able to get out of it and make some plays, that takes an awful lot of beating. So I think the Rams will win, but Cincinnati's definitely a live underdog as long as they have Burrow to chase.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what makes it so interesting. But Sam, want to thank you again for taking the time to join us. Remember, you can check out Sam over at PFF_Sam on Twitter, and we'll continue to enjoy the podcast with Steve. Thanks very much, Sam.
Anytime, guys. Thanks for having me.
Obviously, a big build-up show ahead of the Super Bowl Sunday night, 11:30 p.m. We'll be in Los Angeles on Saturday, 6:30. With Colin, Mark is coming in and out in his Wi-Fi, but delighted to be joined again by Darren Freehill from RT Sport. Darren, we had you on around the Super Bowl last year. Around that time, it was great to have you on. Good to have you on again. This could become a yearly thing, Darren. How's the form?
Yeah, it's not too bad. I'll be honest with you. I'm super jealous of you guys. Live from LA, and what about the rest of us here that help you out during the year? No invite, no.
Here, look, let's get it on the TV, and look, sure, we'll all have a bit of crack, Colin, yeah.
Yeah, next year we'll have our own version of the Galway tent over. I think it's Arizona next year, is it, Michael? Is that an Irish NFL show tent at the Super Bowl? But Darren, I suppose, look, it's the Rams against the Bengals, and what is I suppose, what's your take on this Super Bowl matchup?
Yeah, well, before I get into the game, right, I just want to say that the season that we've just had in the NFL, it is up there, one of the best that in recent years that I can remember, and it goes beyond the sport. To be honest with you, it's been a total soap opera, hasn't it? With everything that has gone on, you couldn't predict some of the storylines both on and off the field, and I think. Obviously, I think the Brady thing, him going, it's just this huge global story, isn't it? And he kind of maybe threatened to take away from the postseason, but if you look at the two teams that are in that Super Bowl, it sums up everything that I love about American football. Especially the rise of the Bengals, because this team were complete rubbish a couple of seasons ago. They hadn't got to the playoffs. I think it was 5 or 6 years. Hadn't even got to the playoffs, and now they're one game away from the biggest prize. And for me, and I think I spoke to you guys about this before, for me, that is the beautiful thing about American sports and about American football in particular, because the worst team in the competition, within reason, within a couple of years, they can turn it around and they can get to this game. And the Bengals are proof of that and evidence of that. And to be honest with you, I think it must be brilliant being, from these cities, because, your team, you genuinely have a chance to bounce back. You've a reason to be excited. Okay, you've had a bad year, but you know what? The way the draft system is set up, and the Bengals have proved that, haven't they? You can bounce back. Like, that doesn't exist here in this country. It's just not even, it's not in our DNA, is it? And I think that I'm really jealous of American sports over that system. I think we've got the final then to prove it.
Yeah, and Darren, just taking on the points you mentioned there, I mean, I think 31 years the Bengals have been before they won a playoff game, and certainly the twists and turns of this season, we've talked about it a lot on this show. Goo-boo, the infamous Irish expression, grotesque, unbelievable, bizarre, and unprecedented, certainly applies to much that we've seen this season. But when we get to the Super Bowl, and you're right, it's two teams you wouldn't have expected, but it's an age-old storyline, isn't it? It's the old hand who's never really got to the big game against the young buck. And I keep referring to them as the Cinderella Bengals many ways. But when you compare the quarterbacks, Burrow, the young buck, Matt Stafford, who was languishing in the Lions for many years, now making it to the big show with the superstar Rams. When you think of those storylines, that big picture piece, how do you feel about how it's going to play out? And equally, like, the different pressures on these guys in this particular game?
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, I think with Joe Burrow, like, he's like nothing we've seen before, is he? These quarterbacks, in my mind, they're meant to be, the Tom Brady, very focused on the game and, say nothing, do nothing, halo over the head. And he just appears to be, the complete opposite of that. He's a breath of fresh air, not just for American football, but for sport in general. And like what he's achieved, in terms of, with his college career, and I think he's going to be the first player, if he wins it, to have won, all the major awards in American football, between college, university, and NFL. It would be absolutely a Cinderella story. It's incredible. I love the way as well, he's not afraid to talk himself up, he's not young. What is he, 25, 26? Phenomenal talent. But like, the thing about it is, he was number one draft, but Stafford is number one too. Like, that has not happened too many times, has it? Where you've had, people kind of, he had some wilderness years, but he's a top quality quarterback, top quality. And I think actually for him to get this chance, he's an experience as well. I think experience is huge in these big games. And, I think he'll want, now that he's gotten his chance, these sort of chances don't come around very often. We spoke about, I think Mahomes, didn't we, last year? Look at him. I fully expected him to have maybe 2 or 3 Super Bowls at this stage. You got to take your chance. And I think with Matthew Stafford, this is his moment. And I think with Joe Burrow's, he's got nothing to lose. He's just going to go out there and do it, isn't he?
You were talking about this time last year, a lot can change in a year. Obviously, Colin and Mark are well aware that my county won the All-Ireland. I'm going to stay in the GEA. I just had to get it into the chat somehow, boys. Darren, in all seriousness, you're talking about the beauty, how beautiful the game is. If you look at the Bengals, they get close a few times in the 80s. They go through periods there where, they only won 4 games last year. Is there any county that we can think of here? I don't want to say Mayo, right? But is there any county that we can maybe compare them to in the GAL where it's like, they've been around, they disappear, but they've never actually got over the line and lifted the stamp? Because I'm trying to think of one, and it's so familiar because, the Bengals have been there, they haven't got it, they've went away, and now they're here again.
Yeah, it's a great question. Like, even any sports, if you take soccer, football in the UK, even for, maybe a Leicester City who actually went on and got the job done, but it's unheard of, isn't it? It's actually unheard of. It would be unbelievable if they won it. And do you know what? People shouldn't be too surprised if they do win it. I know the Rams are favourites. So I think this is just I was looking at the book. I think there's just a touchdown between them, isn't there? But people should they beat them twice already, haven't they, this season? They beat the best team in American football, in my opinion, twice. That was the point I was going to make in terms of the Chiefs to get here.
Yes.
So they're here 100% on merit. And, the Rams are a great story as well, they haven't won it with being in Los Angeles. Sure, they haven't. I think it was this is St. Louis when they won it. So, for them to, it's a high stakes for them as well. So, it's a tough one to call, but I think what I'm edging towards in terms of, you haven't asked me for my call yet, but very often these big games, it's defense, isn't it, that decides them. And the Rams have one hell of a defense. So I think I don't think it's going to be a spectacular game. And I think the Rams might shade it. Do you know that? Good and all as the Bengals story is.
Yeah, I suppose one of the interesting things, if Michael is going to bring in his county, in terms of the Rams and a journey, right? I'm thinking of the way in which they brought in Von Miller, they brought in OBJ, they brought in Stafford. If you were to take, say, Larry Tompkins and his journey from Kildare, he goes on a road trip to New York and he comes back to Cork to reach the promised land. Bringing in all of these guys through trades isn't something we've traditionally seen or seen that much of, Darren. Just your take on just, less even maybe, Von Miller is a superstar, OBJ is a superstar. What do you think about teams kind of building by bringing in guys like that?
Well, my opinion on that is it's very much a short-term fix, isn't it? And I think they're they're loading up for just one go at it, and it's all or nothing, I think, because you're kind of just using all your chips and putting them on that one number and hoping it comes in for you. And look, if they pull it off on Sunday, then it'll be totally worthwhile. So, total opposite to the Bengals and what they've done in terms of, the draft picks and getting in, quality players that way, young players, rookies coming in and doing so well. So, if they do it, they're not going to care. And if they do win as well, I know the Bengals are going to get a lot of attention. But if the Rams win it, it is phenomenal for them to have done it that way, isn't it?
Absolutely, mate. And look, just finally from us, we obviously appreciate you coming on. Hopefully we'll get you on maybe again during the off season. Who knows? Maybe we'll do a wee show at the Galway races. I don't know. We'll see the crack. But here, tell us the crack for a start. What's the plan on Sunday night? Are you going to get a wee night in, maybe a few scoops, and have a late morning on Monday? And also, for people maybe that are watching this and haven't maybe discovered you before, do you want to shout out what you do? Because you obviously work on RT radio, etc. as well.
Yeah, no, so I'm on RT radio. The downside, watch the Super Bowl every year. Downside for me is I'm up very early the next morning for work. So I'm kind of at my desk at 5:30, 6 a.m. But I will still stay up and I'm going to meet my brother-in-law, Des. Shout out to Des Moran. We are going to watch the Super Bowl together. And look, I might have one or two. I'll probably quit at halftime and we'll work a few hours away. But I'll be up right in there just in case the bosses are listening. But I just want to say to you guys to enjoy every minute of Sunday when you're over there. I was really fortunate, and I've been over there a few times for the big one, and it is one of the most special events you could ever attend. And I've been really fortunate to go to some of the biggest events in world sport. But the Super Bowl is something very special. And it's funny you mention the Galway races. What I love is the build up to it, actually, when you get in for the few days beforehand, because it is like the Galway races. It just takes over a city. And it's actually, I think they've got a big advantage in terms of, say our All-Ireland series, it's one day, whereas this is a week-long build-up, and the media coverage, and just go in and look at the media facilities. You'll have seen nothing like it anywhere in the world, and just soak up every single bit of it, because they're memories that are just going to stay with you forever and ever. Really jealous.
Thanks very much, Darren. And for anyone watching, check out Darren's Twitter account, because the range of sports that you cover, it is always fascinating. I love going on, and I've learned so much about all the different sports. But we want to thank you for taking the time to join us. And we look forward to seeing you in Arizona for Super Bowl 57 next year.
It's a great city.
Our final guest on the Irish NFL show, Super Bowl preview special before we all hit LA for the weekend, is a guy I'm sure you're all aware who he is. Just from seeing this broadcast, he's a former NFL kicker who played in the league for over the course of 15 years, including 7 teams such as the Falcons, the Giants. We've seen him most recently on the sideline working as an analyst for CBS. We're delighted for his debut to welcome him into the Irish NFL show. The first guy, I think, from CBS Sports NFL anyway. Jay Feely. Jay, a very, very warm welcome to you.
Well, I am an Irishman. You know, Feely, it was O'Fahely before they dropped the O and changed it to Feely back in the day. But, you know, my family's from over there in Ireland. So it's apropos that I come on with you guys.
You literally just took the first question out of it, because so we always ask everybody, have they any Irish heritage? Are you aware of where in Ireland, or just Ireland? Or?
Yeah, Galway. That's where that's where most of them are from. Yeah.
Happy days.
And the bad thing is I haven't been over there. You know, and I really want to. I've got I had a couple trips planned over the last few years, and because of COVID and whatnot, they got canceled. And I was supposed to take my son when he turned 18. I was going to take him over there for his graduation. The two of us were going to do a 2-week trip and play golf all over Ireland. But unfortunately, it hasn't happened. My wife has been there, which sucks because she's from Finland. She's not even Irish, so she got there before I did.
So it's not that long ago that you were playing, but the kicking position, it's still evolved a bit over time. I mean, obviously, a number of these games are going to come down to field goals kicked by kickers to win the playoff games. We've seen it already this postseason. How do you feel it's evolved even since you left the league, which, as I said, isn't that long ago? I'm not trying to age you here, man.
It is so much different and so much better. You go back to my rookie year, I started playing in 2000, and if you were, 80% in your career or 80% each year, then you were going to keep your job. You were going to stay employed. You were kind of middle of the road. You weren't the best, but you weren't the worst, and you could stay employed. Now, if you're, 85%, they're talking about moving on and getting rid of you. That's a bad year, and so it's getting, so much better incrementally year after year. I think kickers are getting stronger. Their bodies are getting better. They're doing a better job training themselves. You're starting at an earlier age, learning the right technique. I was still in college trying to figure out my technique where, guys now, like my son started as a freshman in high school and he knew the technique already that he wanted to have and that he was taught. And I think that's a huge advantage.
Jay, as a Giants fan, I always think back to a walk-off victory against the Broncos where Eli, in one of Eli's very early days in terms of leading the team down the field, you kicked that winning point. And the game a couple of weeks ago in which you were covering for CBS, where the Bills and the Chiefs, and what it looked like a walk-off victory for the Bills, only to go the other way with the 13 seconds ago. What was it like to cover that game? And I know you were on the broadcast saying what part of the field they needed to get to. Were you shocked at how it turned out?
Well, that game was the best NFL game, I believe, in history. Certainly the best NFL game I've ever watched. And it's the only game where I was working the game and on the sidelines, I'm yelling like a fan. Like I'm like, holy crap, did you see that? I mean, are you kidding me? Did they make that play? Random dudes were high-fiving, I'm not rooting for one team or the other, but it was just unbelievable play after unbelievable play. And it was just so fun to be. I'm like, literally, like, I get paid to be on the sidelines for this game. Like, this is pretty cool.
Absolutely. And I have to say now, I'm going to publicly say this. I personally, Jay, love the CBS coverage more than any other broadcaster at the minute. I mean, yourself, obviously, Jim and Antonia and everybody. It's just, I'm really going to miss that CBS theme tune for the next 6 or 7 months. But this Sunday, we've got 2 of the younger generation head coaches going up against each other. Obviously, Zach Taylor worked together with Sean McVay a few years ago. Mm-hmm. With your long career, was there maybe a head coach that you had great admiration for, one that you can maybe talk about now? So, for example, Rex Ryan, a guy, a very memorable guy. Do you have any moments that you cherish from that?
Well, Rex was crazy. You never knew what Rex was going to do every day. I mean, he did all kinds of things that I can't tell you about on a public podcast, on a show, but he made it fun to come to work every day because you didn't know what Rex was going to do. And if you had a strong locker room like we did, it worked. We went to 2 AFC championships in Rex's first 2 years, and because we could police the locker room ourselves and we had discipline. And when they started getting rid of some of those leaders, it's when it fell apart quickly with Rex. But, I remember a day like two guys got in a fight and they're yelling at each other. And one's this big Samoan dude, and he was an offensive lineman with a bad temper. And one was a defensive back. He was like 200 pounds. And Rex went up to the defensive back and he's like, hey, listen, go into the locker room. You can have the rest of the day off. You don't have to go to meetings. I just want to make sure that you're not in the facility when we finish practice and this guy comes in, because I think he's going to kill you, And so you have the day off. Like, you can leave, take the day off. Don't worry about it. Just don't be there when we get done with practice. Rex was funny like that. He would do all kinds of stuff and keep everybody on their toes. And we had guest kicker every Friday where guys could sign up, offensive linemen, running backs, quarterbacks. And one guy would get picked and they would be the kicker during field goal period. And everybody else would bet on whether or not he would make an extra point. And then you kind of keep going back. He could go back as far as he wanted. Everybody's betting on every kick. And, it's funny to watch some of these guys who are the best in the world, these high level athletes that couldn't kick a ball at all. And it kind of made me feel good. I just sit back and kind of chuckle a little bit. And you guys, all right, you guys think my job's so easy. Like, let's see you come out here and try to kick an extra point. There's a guy, Dan Reeves, who just passed away. I love Dan. Dan was like a grandfather to me and very close. The family actually asked me to come speak at his funeral, which was a distinct honor. And, I was more nervous getting ready and speaking at his funeral than I was broadcasting, the Super Bowl to hundreds of millions of people. Because when it's something like that, you want to say the right words, you want to strike the right tone. You kind of want to have a little bit of levity and tell some funny stories, but you want to make sure that you're honoring the man. And, for me, he was just a great guy and a great coach and did things the right way and treated people the right way. And, it was certainly an honor. He brought me into the NFL, gave me my first chance, and certainly gave me a lot of confidence in myself.
Yeah, Dan Reeves, obviously over 200 wins, one of the rare people to lead two different teams to a Super Bowl.
Yeah, he should have been in the Hall of Fame. It's a shame he didn't get in it before he passed away.
Absolutely. But Jay, I'm curious. You played for a number of teams, obviously. Officially 7, but I think in Kansas you were there for a day. So you might tell us that in a second.
It was like a layover. I had a layover, yeah. So might as well go kick for a day for the Chiefs and then get on my flight and fly home the next day.
But I'm curious, from a player's mentality, I mean, you weren't fortunate enough to play in a Super Bowl during your particular career. However, there are a number of senior veteran players here that are going to be playing their first ever Super Bowl. And people are obviously talking about Matt Stafford and the time he was in the Lions. But the story for me that resonates so strongly is Andrew Whitworth. I mean, a long-standing tackle, a long-standing great offensive lineman. Now he's not with the Bengals, who he played with for so long, but he's on the other side of the field.
The irony.
It's so ironic. But I mean, do you think it's harder for those veteran guys that know this comes around so rarely? Are they more likely sometimes to be overwhelmed by this than the rookies or the younger players who just don't know any better?
Yeah, you look at the Bengals kicker, Evan McPherson. I kind of talked about it last week. Like, he doesn't know what he doesn't know yet. He's just out there having fun, and he doesn't have any of those mental battle scars yet, and he hasn't chunked one in the water and then he comes back and he's got to, try and hit that shot again. You think about like Rory McIlroy, when he goes back and plays at Augusta and he's got to make the turn and go to the back nine, and he knows, in the back of his mind, like, I threw away a Masters championship here on this back nine. When you're so young, you don't have those battle scars, and you just go out there and you just have fun playing. When you played as long as Whit has, and he's as good a guy and as good a player as there is in the NFL. And just, I want the Rams to win because of guys like him and their special teams coach, a guy named Joe DeCamillis, who brought me into the NFL with Dan Reeves in Atlanta. And then I played my last year in the NFL with him in Chicago. And he's been in a number of Super Bowls with two different teams, Denver and Atlanta, but he hasn't won one yet, and so I hope they win for a guy like that. And, when you get to my age and you have the relationships that you do all around the league with players and coaches and owners and GMs, people always ask me, what's your favorite team? And really for me, I root for the guys that I know, the guys that I have relationships with, that I'm friends with, and that I like. The good thing is both of these staffs, Zach Taylor and Lou Anarumo as defensive coordinator, and you go on the other side with Sean McVay and the staff that he has. Kevin O'Connell was a good teammate of mine, guy that I really liked when I was with the Jets. Thrilled that he got or supposedly got a head coaching job here with the Vikings, and you just kind of root for those kind of guys, and so the staffs, as I look at this game, both the staffs, are guys that I can root for very easily. And there's certainly a number of players, like you mentioned, like Witt and Stafford and some of those guys that have played a long time that finally are getting that opportunity.
Jay, last April, we did a 6-hour broadcast to our Irish, UK, and European viewers on the draft. And one of the early selections, which caught us all by surprise, was the fact that the Bengals went away from Penei Sewell and went to Jamar Chase. And that offensive line, despite all the frailties this season, is in the Super Bowl. The 9 sacks against the Titans. Is that a big concern leading into this game for the Bengals?
Yeah, I think the Rams win big, and I think it's because of that offensive line. The defensive line, it's such a bad matchup for them. With the strength that this Rams team has on the defensive line, and Aaron Donald and Von Miller on the outside, and they got so many different players that they can bring in that you just figure that Cincinnati knows going into this game that they have to get the ball out quick. That Rams defensive line is just so deep. And you just figure that Cincinnati is going to have to get the ball out quick. They're going to have to take short drops, throw the ball quickly, which doesn't allow them to go down the field and really test that secondary, the Rams, like they'd like to, because I figure they're going to be so scared of having Joe Burrow take 7-step drops and stand in the pocket. So you're going to get the ball out quick, but that allows the Rams to play tight coverage, to have Jalen Ramsey say on Jamar Chase and not allow him to get off the line of scrimmage. And so I think it's going to make it very difficult on Joe Burrow in that offense.
Jay, like all of us, we're desperately looking forward to Sunday. Can't come soon enough and can't wait to see it. To be honest, love hearing you and seeing you on CBS. There's so many other stories we could go into with you about Bill Parcells, about scoring 25 points against the Denver Broncos that someone on this show actually supports. But we might cover them another time with you. In the moment, thanks ever so much for your time in what is a really busy week. We know. Appreciate you having you on the Irish NFL show, and obviously enjoy the game on Sunday.
Boys, have a great time in LA, and you better represent Ireland well over there.
We will.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Jay. Cheers.
All right, take care, guys.
Thanks, Jay.